The forest was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made Emma's skin crawl. The only sound was the crunch of snow beneath her boots as she trudged through the dense woods. She had been hiking for hours, her breath forming little clouds in the freezing air. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. But Emma barely noticed. She was too focused on finding her way back to the trail before it got too dark. Just as she was about to turn around, she heard it, a low, pained whimper. It was faint, almost like the wind, but it was enough to make her stop in her tracks. Her heart skipped a beat. She listened carefully, her eyes scanning the trees. The sound came again, louder this time. It wasn't the wind, it was an animal. Curiosity tugged at her, pulling her deeper into the woods. The whimper grew more desperate, more urgent. Emma's instincts told her to be careful, but something about the sound made her keep going. She moved slowly, her boots sinking into the snow with every step. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches casting long, twisted shadows on the ground. And then she saw it. A massive bear, tied to a tree with thick frayed ropes. Its fur was matted and dirty, its body trembling from the cold. The ropes had cut into its skin, leaving raw, bloody marks. The bear's eyes were wide with fear, its breath coming in shallow puffs. It wasn't growling or threatening, it was shivering, its massive frame looking smaller, weaker. Emma's heart raced. She froze, her mind racing with questions. Who would do something like this? Why would anyone tie up a bear and leave it to freeze? She glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching her, but the forest was empty. It was just her and the bear. She hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to run. Bears were dangerous, unpredictable, but this one wasn't acting like a wild animal. It wasn't trying to attack or escape. It just stood there, its eyes locked onto hers. For a moment, it felt like the bear was pleading with her, begging for help. Emma's chest tightened. She couldn't leave it here, it would die. But how could she possibly help? She wasn't equipped to handle a wild animal. She didn't even have a phone signal out here. She glanced at the ropes, then at the bear. Its eyes never left hers. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to the bear. "Okay, let's think." She took a deep breath and reached into her backpack, pulling out a small knife she always carried for emergencies. The bear flinched at the movement but didn't growl or snarl. It just watched her, its breath quickening. "It's okay," Emma said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to help you, okay?" She moved slowly, carefully toward the ropes. Every step felt like an eternity. The bear's eyes followed her, its massive body tense. Emma's hands shook as she gripped the knife. What if it attacked her the moment it was free? What if this was a huge mistake? But she couldn't stop now. She reached the first rope and began cutting through it. The bear shifted slightly, its breath hitching. Emma froze, her heart pounding in her chest, but the bear didn't move. It just stood there watching her. The first rope snapped and the bear let out a deep, rumbling sound. Emma's stomach churned, but she forced herself to keep going. She moved to the second rope, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the knife. The bear's breath was loud now, almost like a warning. "It's okay," Emma whispered again, more to calm herself than the bear. "Just a little more." The second rope gave way, and the bear shifted again, its massive frame towering over her. Emma stumbled back, her knife still in hand. Her heart was racing, her breath coming in short gasps. The bear stood there for a moment, its eyes locked onto hers. Then, without warning, it turned and lumbered into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. Emma stood there, her legs shaking. She had done it. She had freed the bear. But as she turned to leave, something on the ground caught her eye. Near the base of the tree, half buried in the snow, was a piece of cloth. It was stained with blood. Her stomach dropped as she picked it up. It wasn't just any cloth. It was a piece of a uniform, and it had a logo on it, a logo she recognized. Emma's mind raced. What was a piece of a uniform doing here? Who had tied up the bear? And why? She glanced around, suddenly feeling like she was being watched. The forest, which had felt so empty moments ago, now seemed alive with unseen dangers. She stuffed the cloth into her pocket and started walking, her pace quickening. She needed to get out of here. But as she moved through the trees, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The bear was free, but the mystery was far from over. And then she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. It was faint, but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps. Someone was following her. Emma's heart pounded as the sound of footsteps grew louder. She spun around, her eyes scanning the shadowy trees. The forest was eerily quiet again, except for the faint crunch of snow. Someone, or something, was out there. "Hello!" she called out, her voice trembling. No response. She tightened her grip on the knife, her mind racing. Was it the person who had tied up the bear, or something worse? She couldn't stay here. She had to keep moving. Emma turned and started walking, her pace quickening. The footsteps followed, matching her speed. She glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing, just trees and shadows. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she broke into a jog. The footsteps sped up too. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice echoing through the forest. Still no answer. She was running now, her boots slipping on the icy ground. The footsteps were right behind her, closing in. She could hear them. Heavy, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was it a person, an animal, or something else entirely? Just as she thought she couldn't run anymore, she tripped. Her knee hit the ground hard, and she cried out in pain. The footsteps stopped. Emma froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She slowly turned around, expecting to see someone or something standing over her. But there was nothing, just the empty forest. She let out a shaky breath, her body trembling. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe it was just the wind or her own fear playing tricks on her. She stood up, brushing the snow off her pants, and looked around. The forest was silent again, but then she saw it. A few feet away, partially hidden under the snow, was a small, metallic object. She walked over and picked it up. It was a key, old and rusted, with strange symbols etched into it. Emma frowned. What was a key doing out here in the middle of nowhere? She turned it over in her hands, her mind racing. The symbols looked familiar, but she couldn't quite place them. She stuffed the key into her pocket and kept walking, her eyes darting around nervously. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, the trees growing thicker and darker. Emma's thoughts were a jumbled mess. The bear, the uniform, the footsteps, and now this key. None of it made sense. She felt like she was being pulled into something much bigger than she could understand. As she walked, she noticed something else. The trees around her were marked, deep scratches in the bark like claw marks. But these weren't from a bear. They were too high, too precise. Emma's stomach churned as she ran her fingers over the marks. What could have made these? She kept moving, her unease growing with every step. The forest felt different now, colder, darker, more oppressive. The sun had completely set, and the only light came from the pale glow of the moon filtering through the trees. And then she heard it again. The footsteps. This time they were coming from ahead of her. Emma stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She could see movement in the shadows, a figure barely visible in the dim light. It was tall, too tall to be a person, and it was moving toward her. Emma's instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was frozen in place, her eyes locked on the figure. It stepped into a patch of moonlight, and she finally saw it clearly. It wasn't human. The creature was massive, its body covered in thick, matted fur. Its eyes glowed a faint yellow, and its long, clawed hands hung at its sides. But the most terrifying part was its face, a twisted mix of animal and human, with sharp teeth and a snout-like nose. Emma's mind went blank. She had never seen anything like this. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything she could name. The creature tilted its head, studying her with those glowing eyes. Then it let out a low, guttural growl that sent chills down her spine. She finally found her voice. What are you?" The creature didn't answer. It took a step closer, its claws digging into the snow. Emma stumbled back, her knife trembling in her hand. She knew it was useless against something like this, but it was all she had. "Stay back!" she shouted, her voice cracking. The creature stopped, its head tilting again. For a moment it almost looked curious. Then it let out another growl, deeper and more menacing this time. Emma's heart raced as she tried to think of a way out. She couldn't fight this thing, she couldn't outrun it, but maybe, just maybe, she could reason with it. I don't want to hurt you," she said, her voice shaking. "I just want to leave, please." The creature stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Then, to her surprise, it stepped aside, clearing a path. Emma didn't wait to see if it was a trick. She bolted, running as fast as she could through the snow. She didn't look back. She didn't stop. She just ran, her heart pounding in her ears. The forest blurred around her, the trees, becoming a dark, shapeless mass. She didn't know where she was going, but she didn't care. She just had to get away. Finally, she burst into a small clearing. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. She looked around, her eyes wide with fear. The clearing was empty, but she could still feel the creature's presence, like a shadow hanging over her. And then she saw it. In the center of the clearing was a door, an old wooden door, standing upright in the middle of nowhere. It was covered in the same symbols as the key. Emma's breath caught in her throat. What was a door doing in the middle of the forest? And why did it feel like it was calling to her? Emma stared at the door, her mind racing. It made no sense. A door, standing alone in the middle of the forest, with no walls or structure around it. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, matching the ones on the key she had found earlier. Her hand instinctively went to her pocket, where the key rested. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling as she held it up to the door. The symbols on the key matched the ones on the door perfectly. "What is this?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The forest around her was silent, as if holding its breath. Even the wind had stopped, leaving the air unnaturally still. Emma's heart pounded as she stepped closer to the door. It was old. The wood cracked and weathered, but it felt alive, like it was waiting for her. She reached out, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Part of her wanted to turn around and run, to leave this strange place and never look back. But another part of her, a deeper, more curious part, needed to know what was on the other side. Before she could make a decision, she heard it again. The footsteps. They were faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere behind her. Emma spun around, her eyes scanning the trees. The creature was back. She could see its glowing eyes in the shadows, watching her. "Stay back!" she shouted, her voice shaking. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, its head tilted as if waiting for her to do something. Emma's mind raced. She didn't have time to think. She had to act. She turned back to the door and shoved the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. With a deep breath, she turned the key. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness on the other side. Emma hesitated. What was she doing? This was insane. But the footsteps were getting louder, closer. She didn't have a choice. She stepped through the door. The moment she crossed the threshold, the world around her changed. The forest was gone, replaced by a vast open field bathed in golden light. The air was warm, the ground soft beneath her feet. It was like stepping into another world. Emma turned around, expecting to see the door behind her, but it was gone. In its place was a tree, a massive, ancient tree with branches that stretched toward the sky. The symbols from the door were carved into its trunk, glowing faintly. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're safe. The voice came from behind her. Emma spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing a few feet away was a woman. She was tall and elegant, with long silver hair that shimmered in the light. Her eyes were a piercing blue, and she wore a flowing dress that seemed to blend into the surroundings. "Who are you?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. The woman smiled softly. "I've been waiting for you, Emma." Emma's breath caught. "How do you know my name?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she gestured to the field around them. "This place is a sanctuary, a refuge for those who are lost." Emma shook her head, her mind reeling. "I don't understand. What is this place? How did I get here?" The woman's smile faded, replaced by a look of sadness. "You were brought here because you are needed. The forest you came from is in danger, and you are the only one who can save it." Emma stared at her, stunned. "Me? Why me? I'm nobody." "You are far from nobody," the woman said firmly. "You freed the bear, didn't you? You showed courage and compassion when others would have turned away. That is why you were chosen." Emma's mind raced. None of this made sense. Chosen for what? What am I supposed to do? The woman stepped closer, her eyes locking onto Emma's. "The forest is dying. The creature you saw, the one that followed you, is a guardian, but it has been corrupted. It was once a protector of this land, but now it spreads darkness and fear. You must find the source of its corruption and destroy it." Emma shook her head, overwhelmed. "I can't do that. I don't even know what I'm dealing with." "You can," the woman said gently. "You have the key. It will guide you." Emma looked down at the key in her hand. It felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of the task ahead. "What do I do with it?" The woman pointed to the ancient tree. "The answers lie within, but be warned, the journey will not be easy. You will face challenges that will test your courage, your strength, and your heart." Emma swallowed hard. She wanted to argue, to say she wasn't the right person for this, but deep down, she knew she couldn't walk away. Not now. "Okay," she said finally. "What do I need to do?" The woman smiled again, her eyes filled with warmth. "Follow the light. It will lead you to the heart of the forest. But remember, not everything is as it seems. Trust your instincts, and you will find the truth." Before Emma could ask anything else, the woman began to fade, her form dissolving into the golden light. "Wait!" Emma called out. "What's your name?" The woman's voice echoed softly like a whisper on the wind. "I am the spirit of the forest, and you, Emma, are its hope." And then she was gone. Emma stood there, alone in the field, her mind spinning. She looked down at the key, then at the ancient tree. The symbols on its trunk glowed brighter, as if urging her forward. She took a deep breath and stepped toward the tree. As she approached, the ground beneath her feet began to shift. The field disappeared, replaced by a narrow path that led into a dense, dark forest. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. Emma hesitated, her heart pounding. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew she couldn't turn back. She had to see this through. She stepped onto the path and began to walk. The path ahead was narrow and winding, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to close in on her with every step. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sound was the crunch of twigs beneath Emma's boots. The golden light from the field was gone, replaced by an eerie, dim glow that barely illuminated the way forward. Emma clutched the key tightly in her hand, her mind racing. The spirit's words echoed in her head. "Follow the light. Trust your instincts." But there was no light here, just shadows and darkness. She felt a pang of doubt. What if she was going the wrong way? What if this was all a mistake? As she walked, she noticed something strange. The trees around her were changing. Their bark was darker, their branches twisted into unnatural shapes. The symbols from the door and the key were carved into some of the trunks, but they looked different here, distorted, almost menacing. Emma's unease grew with every step. She felt like she was being watched, though she couldn't see anyone or anything around her. The forest seemed alive, its presence pressing down on her like a weight. And then she heard it. A faint whisper, so soft she almost thought she imagined it. She stopped, her breath catching in her throat. The whisper came again, louder this time. It was coming from somewhere ahead. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. Just the whisper, growing louder, more insistent. Emma's heart raced as she forced herself to keep moving. The path twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the forest. The whispers grew into voices, overlapping and indistinct, like a crowd murmuring in the distance. She rounded a bend and froze. Ahead of her was a clearing, but it wasn't like the one with the door. This place was dark, the ground covered in blackened grass and twisted roots. In the center of the clearing stood a figure, a man. His back turned to her. He was tall, with broad shoulders and long dark hair. He wore a tattered cloak that seemed to blend into the shadows. Emma's instincts screamed at her to run, but something about the man held her in place. He didn't move, didn't turn around. He just stood there, as if waiting for her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man turned slowly, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. His face was pale, his eyes a piercing, unnatural blue. But the most shocking part was his expression. It was one of recognition, as if he knew her. "Emma," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I've been waiting for you." Emma took a step back, her heart pounding. "How do you know my name?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I know many things about you, more than you realize." Emma's mind raced. Was this the source of the corruption the spirit had mentioned, or something else entirely? She tightened her grip on the key, her only weapon. "What do you want?" she demanded, trying to sound braver than she felt. The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of sadness. "I want what you want, Emma, to save the forest. But you've been misled." Emma frowned. "What are you talking about?" The man stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "The spirit who sent you here, she's not what she seems. She's the one who corrupted the Guardian. She's the one spreading the darkness." Emma shook her head, her mind reeling. That's not true. She said the Guardian was corrupted and I needed to stop it." "And you believed her?" the man asked, his voice tinged with pity. "Think about it, Emma. Why would a spirit need you to do her bidding? Why wouldn't she stop the corruption herself?" Emma opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. The man's words struck a chord, stirring doubts she hadn't realized she had. "The truth is," the man continued, "the spirit is using you. She wants you to destroy the Guardian so she can take control of the forest. But if you do that, the darkness will spread unchecked. The forest will die." Emma's chest tightened. She didn't know what to believe. The spirit had seemed so kind, so trustworthy. But the man's words made sense, too. "Why should I believe you?" she asked, her voice shaking. The man's expression softened. "Because I'm the one who sent the bear to you." Emma's eyes widened. "What?" "The bear was a test," the man explained. "I needed to see if you had the courage and compassion to help, and you passed. You freed the bear even when it put you in danger. That's why I'm telling you the truth now." Emma's mind raced. The bear, the door, the spirit. It was all connected. But who was telling the truth? The spirit, or this man? "What do you want me to do?" she asked finally. The man stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "I want you to help me stop the spirit. Together we can save the forest, but you have to trust me." Emma hesitated, her heart pounding. She didn't know who to believe, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that the spirit had lied to her. "Okay," she said slowly. "What do we do?" The man smiled, a genuine smile this time. First, we need to find the heart of the forest. That's where the spirit's power lies, but be warned, she will try to stop us. She will use your doubts and fears against you. Emma nodded, her resolve hardening. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let the forest die. "Let's go," she said. The man turned and began walking, his cloak billowing behind him. Emma followed, her mind racing with questions. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she didn't have a choice. She had to see this through. As they walked, the forest around them seemed to shift and change, the trees growing darker, the air colder. The whispers returned, louder and more urgent, but Emma forced herself to ignore them. She focused on the path ahead, on the man leading her, and then she saw it. In the distance, glowing faintly in the darkness, was a tree, a massive, ancient tree with roots that seemed to stretch into the earth itself. Its branches were bare, its trunk twisted and gnarled, but at its base was a door, just like the one she had seen before. "That's it," the man said, his voice low, "the heart of the forest." Emma's heart raced as they approached the tree. She could feel its power, its presence, like a pulse in the air. But as they drew closer, she noticed something else. The door was already open. The open door loomed before them, a gaping maw of darkness that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Emma's heart raced as she stared at it, her mind swirling with questions. Why was it open? Had someone, or something, beaten them here? The man beside her stepped forward, his expression grim. "This isn't right," he muttered. "The door should be sealed. Something's wrong." Emma glanced at him, her unease growing. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the door, his movements cautious but determined. Emma hesitated for a moment before following, her grip tightening on the key. The air around the tree was thick, almost suffocating, and the whispers she had heard earlier were now a deafening chorus echoing in her mind. As they reached the door, the man stopped and turned to her. "Stay close," he said. "Whatever happens, don't let go of the key." Emma nodded. Though her hands were trembling, she didn't know what to expect, but she knew there was no turning back now. They stepped through the door together, and the world around them shifted once again. The darkness gave way to a vast, cavernous space, its walls lined with glowing crystals that cast an eerie blue light. The air was cold, and the ground beneath their feet was slick with moisture. But what caught Emma's attention was the figure standing in the center of the cavern. It was the spirit, the woman who had sent her on this journey. But she looked different now. Her silver hair was tangled, her dress torn and stained. Her piercing blue eyes glowed with an intensity that made Emma's skin crawl. "Emma," the spirit said, her voice echoing through the cavern, "you shouldn't have come here." Emma's breath caught. "What's going on? Why is the door open?" The spirit's expression darkened. "Because he opened it," she said, gesturing to the man beside Emma. "He's been lying to you, Emma. He's the one spreading the corruption." Emma's head snapped toward the man, her heart pounding. "Is that true?" The man's face was unreadable. "Don't listen to her, Emma. She's trying to manipulate you." The spirit stepped closer, her eyes never leaving Emma's. "Think about it. Who sent the bear to you? Who tied it up and left it to die? It wasn't me. It was him." Emma's mind raced. The man had admitted to sending the bear, but he'd said it was a test. Could he have been lying? "Emma," the man said, his voice calm but urgent. "She's the one who corrupted the Guardian. She's the one who wants to control the forest. You have to trust me." The spirit laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Trust you? You've done nothing but deceive her from the start. You've been using her to get to me." Emma's chest tightened as she looked between them, her mind spinning. She didn't know who to believe. Both of them had answers, but both of them could be lying. "Why should I trust either of you?" she asked, her voice shaking. The spirit's expression softened. "Because I've been trying to protect you, Emma. The forest is dying, and you're the only one who can save it. But he's been working against us from the beginning." The man stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "Don't listen to her, Emma. She's the one who's been manipulating you. She's the one who wants to destroy the forest." Emma's head was pounding, the whispers in her mind growing louder, more insistent. She couldn't think straight. She didn't know what to do. And then she noticed something. The key in her hand was glowing, its light pulsing in time with the crystals on the walls. She looked down at it, her breath catching. The symbols on the key were shifting, rearranging themselves into a new pattern. "What's happening?" she whispered. The spirit's eyes widened. "The key. It's reacting to the heart of the forest. Emma, you have to use it. Now." The man's expression turned desperate. "No, Emma. If you use the key, you'll destroy the forest. You have to trust me." Emma's hands were trembling as she held the key. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know who to trust. And then she heard it. A voice, soft but clear, cutting through the chaos in her mind. "Trust yourself." Emma's breath caught. The voice wasn't coming from the spirit or the man. It was coming from within her. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She didn't need to trust the spirit or the man. She needed to trust herself. When she opened her eyes, her resolve was firm. She stepped forward, holding the key out in front of her. "I'm not choosing sides," she said, her voice steady. "I'm choosing the forest." The spirit and the man both stared at her, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. "Emma, don't!" the man began, but it was too late. Emma plunged the key into the ground, and the cavern erupted in light. The light from the key exploded outward, filling the cavern with a blinding glow. Emma shielded her eyes, her heart pounding as the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The air crackled with energy, and the whispers in her mind grew into a deafening roar. When the light finally faded, Emma lowered her arm and looked around. The cavern was gone. She was standing in a vast open field, the sky above her a swirling mix of colors, deep purples, vibrant blues, and streaks of gold. The air was warm, and the ground beneath her feet was soft, covered in lush green grass. But what caught her attention was the tree. It was the same ancient tree she had seen before, but it was different now. Its twisted, gnarled branches were gone, replaced by strong, healthy limbs covered in vibrant leaves. The symbols carved into its trunk glowed faintly, pulsing with a steady rhythm. Emma's breath caught. She had done it. She had saved the forest. But as she stepped closer to the tree, she noticed something strange. The symbols on the trunk were shifting, rearranging themselves into a new pattern. And then, without warning, the ground beneath her feet began to crack. Emma stumbled back, her heart racing. The crack spread quickly, splitting the earth apart. She turned to run, but it was too late. The ground gave way, and she fell. The fall seemed to last forever, the darkness swallowing her whole. When she finally landed, it was with a soft thud, the impact barely registering. She opened her eyes and found herself in a place that defied explanation. It was a city, but not like any city she had ever seen. The buildings were made of crystal, their surfaces shimmering with an otherworldly light. The streets were empty, the air silent, except for the faint hum of energy that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Emma stood slowly, her legs trembling. "Where am I?" she whispered. "You're in the heart of it all." The voice came from behind her. Emma spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing a few feet away was a figure, a woman, but unlike any woman Emma had ever seen. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes glowed with a soft golden light. She wore a flowing gown that seemed to be made of light itself, shifting and changing with every movement. "Who are you?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I am the keeper, and you, Emma, have done something extraordinary." Emma frowned. "What do you mean? I thought I saved the forest." "You did," the keeper said, "but the forest is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The key you used, it wasn't just a key, it was a catalyst. And by using it, you've awakened something that has been dormant for centuries." Emma's mind raced. "What are you talking about? What did I awaken?" The keeper's expression turned serious. "The veil, a barrier between worlds. And now that it's been disturbed, the balance between those worlds is at risk." Emma's chest tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means," the keeper said, "that you've opened a door that should have remained closed. And now, forces from both sides will stop at nothing to control it." Emma shook her head, her mind reeling. "I didn't mean to do that. I just wanted to save the forest." "I know," the keeper said gently, "but intentions don't change consequences, and now you're the only one who can fix this." Emma's legs felt like they might give out. "How?" "I don't even know what's happening." The keeper stepped closer, her eyes locking onto Emma's. "You must find the shards, fragments of the veil that were scattered when you used the key. If you can gather them, you can repair the damage. But be warned, others will be searching for them too, and they will do whatever it takes to claim them." Emma's breath caught. "Others? Who?" The keeper's expression darkened. "Those who seek to use the veil for their own purposes. Some want to destroy it, unleashing chaos across worlds. Others want to control it, bending reality to their will. And then there are those who simply want to watch it all burn." Emma's stomach churned. This was too much. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't even sure she believed in other worlds. But the keeper's words rang with a truth she couldn't ignore. "What happens if I don't find the shards?" she asked. The keeper's gaze was steady. "Then the veil will collapse. And when it does, the consequences will be catastrophic. Worlds will collide, realities will unravel, and everything you know, everything you love, will be lost." Emma's chest tightened. She didn't want this responsibility. She didn't want any of this. But she knew she couldn't walk away. "Okay," she said finally. "Where do I start?" The keeper smiled, a hint of relief in her eyes. "The first shard is close, but you must hurry. Others are already searching for it." Before Emma could ask anything else, the keeper began to fade, her form dissolving into the light. "Wait!" Emma called out. "How will I know where to go?" The keeper's voice echoed softly, like a whisper on the wind. "Follow the light, Emma. It will guide you." And then she was gone. Emma stood there, alone in the crystal city, her mind spinning. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let the veil collapse. She took a deep breath and began to walk, her eyes scanning the shimmering streets for any sign of the shard. The air around her seemed to hum with energy, and the light from the crystals pulsed in time with her steps. And then she saw it. In the distance, glowing faintly in the shadows, was a shard of crystal, its surface shimmering with the same light as the key. Emma's heart raced as she approached it, her hand reaching out to touch it. But before she could, a voice stopped her in her tracks. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Emma spun around, her breath catching in her throat. Standing a few feet away was a figure, a man, his face hidden in shadow. But his voice was unmistakable. It was the man from the forest. Emma froze, her hand hovering just inches from the shard. The man from the forest stepped closer, his face still hidden in shadow, but his voice was unmistakable, calm, smooth, and laced with a hint of danger. "You don't want to touch that," he said, his tone almost casual, as if they were discussing the weather. Emma's heart raced as she took a step back, her eyes darting between the shard and the man. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The man tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I could ask you the same question. This isn't exactly a place for tourists." Emma's mind raced. She didn't trust him, not after everything that had happened, but she couldn't deny that he had answers she needed. "The keeper sent me," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "I'm here to find the shards and fix the veil." The man chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent a chill down her spine. "The keeper, huh? And you believed her?" Emma frowned. "Why wouldn't I?" The man stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "Because she's not what she seems. None of them are. The spirit, the keeper, they're all playing you, Emma. They're using you to get what they want." Emma's chest tightened. "And what do they want?" The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of seriousness. "Power, control. The veil isn't just a barrier between worlds. It's a source of unimaginable energy. And whoever controls it controls everything." Emma shook her head, her mind reeling. "That doesn't make sense. The keeper said the veil was collapsing. She said I needed to fix it." "And she's not wrong," the man said. "But fixing it isn't as simple as gathering the shards. If you do that, you'll be handing the veil's power over to her. And trust me, you don't want that." Emma's breath caught. "Then what am I supposed to do?" The man stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "You need to destroy the shards." Emma stared at him, stunned. "Destroy them? But that would break the veil completely," the man finished. "Yes, but sometimes breaking something is the only way to rebuild it. If you destroy the shards, the veil will collapse, but it will also reset. The balance will be restored." Emma's mind raced. She didn't know what to believe. The keeper had told her to gather the shards. The man was telling her to destroy them. Both of them claimed to be telling the truth, but both of them could be lying. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice shaking. The man's expression softened. "Because I'm the only one who's been honest with you from the start. I told you the spirit was lying. I told you the keeper wasn't what she seemed. And I'm telling you now, if you don't destroy the shards, the consequences will be worse than you can imagine." Emma's chest tightened. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know who to trust. And then she heard it, a faint hum coming from the shard. She turned to look at it, her breath catching. The shard was glowing brighter now, its light pulsing in time with her heartbeat. "Emma," the man said, his voice urgent, "you need to decide, now." Emma's hands were trembling as she reached for the shard. She didn't know what to do, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let the veil fall into the wrong hands. She grabbed the shard. The moment her fingers touched it, a surge of energy shot through her body, so intense it felt like her bones were on fire. She cried out, her vision blurring as the world around her began to shift. When the pain finally subsided, she found herself standing in a place that defied explanation. It was a library, but not like any library she had ever seen. The shelves stretched endlessly in every direction, filled with books that glowed with an otherworldly light. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and something else, something she couldn't quite place. And then she saw him. Sitting at a desk in the center of the library was a man. He was older, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a suit that seemed to shimmer in the light, and his expression was one of calm curiosity. "Emma," he said, his voice warm and welcoming, "I've been expecting you." Emma's breath caught. "Who are you?" The man smiled. "I am the archivist, and you, my dear, have just taken the first step toward unlocking the truth." Emma's mind raced. "What truth?" The archivist leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "The truth about the veil, about the shards, about everything." Emma's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" The archivist's smile widened. "The veil isn't just a barrier between worlds, it's a prison. And the shards aren't just fragments of the veil. They're keys, keys to something far greater than you can imagine." Emma's heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" The archivist stood, his movements slow and deliberate. "The veil was created to contain something ancient, something powerful. And now, thanks to you, it's starting to wake up." Emma's breath caught. "What is it?" The archivist's expression turned serious. "A being known as the Devourer, and if it escapes, it will consume everything, worlds, realities, even time itself." Emma's legs felt like they might give out. "How do I stop it?" The archivist's smile returned, but it was tinged with sadness. "You can't. Not alone. But there is a way to contain it. A way to rebuild the veil stronger than before. But it will require a sacrifice." Emma's chest tightened. What kind of sacrifice? The archivist's gaze was steady. "The shards are tied to you now. To destroy them, you'll have to destroy a part of yourself." Emma's breath caught. "What does that mean?" The archivist's expression softened. "It means you'll have to give up something precious. A memory. A part of who you are. But if you don't, the Devourer will escape, and everything will be lost." Emma's mind raced. She didn't know what to do, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let the Devourer escape. "Okay," she said finally. "What do I need to do?" The archivist smiled, a hint of relief in his eyes. "Follow me." Emma followed the archivist through the endless library, her mind racing with questions. The weight of what he had told her pressed heavily on her chest. The Devourer, the veil, the sacrifice. It was all too much, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. The archivist stopped in front of a large, ornate door. It was unlike anything Emma had ever seen, its surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change as she looked at them. "This is it," the archivist said, his voice solemn. "Beyond this door lies the heart of the veil, and the Devourer." Emma's breath caught. "What do I do?" The archivist turned to her, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and hope. "You must enter and face the Devourer. But remember, the only way to contain it is to destroy the shards. And to do that, you'll have to give up something precious." Emma nodded, her hands trembling. "What will I lose?" The archivist's expression softened. "That's for you to decide. It could be a memory, a part of who you are, or something else entirely. But whatever it is, it will be a part of you that you can never get back." Emma's chest tightened. She didn't know what to choose, but she knew she couldn't let the Devourer escape. "Okay," she said finally. "I'm ready." The archivist nodded and opened the door. Beyond it was a vast empty space, a void filled with swirling darkness. At its center was the Devourer. It was unlike anything Emma had ever seen. A massive, shapeless entity, its form constantly shifting and changing. It radiated an aura of pure destruction, its presence so overwhelming that Emma felt like she might collapse just from looking at it. But she didn't look away. She stepped into the void, the shard in her hand glowing brighter with every step. The Devourer turned its attention to her, its form shifting into something almost human. A face with hollow eyes and a mouth that seemed to stretch endlessly. "You cannot stop me," it said, its voice a deep, guttural growl that echoed through the void. Emma's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "I have to try." She held up the shard, its light piercing the darkness. The Devourer recoiled, its form writhing in pain. "You think you can contain me," it snarled. "You are nothing." Emma's hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. "Maybe I am nothing, but I'm not alone." She closed her eyes and focused on the shard. She thought about everything she had been through, the forest, the spirit, the keeper, the man, the archivist. She thought about the sacrifices she had made and the ones she was about to make. And then she made her choice. She thought of her happiest memory, a moment from her childhood, sitting by a lake with her family. The sun was warm on her skin, the sound of laughter filling the air. It was a memory she had cherished for as long as she could remember, and now she would give it up. Tears streamed down her face as she let go of the memory, pouring it into the shard. The light grew brighter and brighter until it consumed everything. When Emma opened her eyes, the void was gone. She was standing in the library, the archivist beside her. "It's done," he said softly. "The devourer is contained. The veil is whole again." Emma's chest tightened. She could feel the absence of the memory, like a hole in her heart. But she also felt something else, a sense of peace. "What happens now?" she asked. The archivist smiled. "Now you go home. The forest is safe, the worlds are safe, and you have done something extraordinary." Emma nodded, though her heart was heavy. She had saved the forest, saved the worlds, but at a cost. As she turned to leave, the archivist spoke again. "Emma, remember this. Sacrifice is never easy, but it is often necessary, and in the end, it is what defines us." Emma took a deep breath and stepped through the door. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the forest. The trees were healthy and vibrant, the air filled with the sound of birdsong. The bear she had freed was there, watching her with gentle eyes. Emma smiled, though tears still streamed down her face. She had lost something precious, but she had gained something even greater, the knowledge that she had made a difference. And as she walked through the forest, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage and compassion. The story of Emma teaches us that true strength lies in sacrifice and selflessness. Sometimes the greatest battles we face require us to give up something precious, a part of ourselves, a cherished memory, or even our comfort. But in doing so, we can create a better world for others. It also reminds us that trusting ourselves is just as important as trusting others. In a world filled with uncertainty and conflicting voices, the most powerful guide we have is our own heart. Finally, it shows us that even the smallest actions can have a profound impact. Emma's journey began with a simple act of kindness, freeing a bear, and grew into a mission to save worlds. Never underestimate the power of compassion and courage.